Good afternoon, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the board and management of the NESG, it is my pleasure to warmly welcome you to this important pre-summit that is being organized by the Mining Thematic Group of the NESG Manufacturing and Mining Policy Commission. The theme of this event, as has been advertised or published, is leveraging the African mining vision for Nigeria's mining industry transformation and growth. This gathering is one of the pre-summit events of the 30th Nigerian Economic Summit Group, known as NEST30, which is being jointly organized by the NESG and the Federal Ministry of Budget and Economic Planning. The goal of the pre-summit event is to engage stakeholders through a series of virtual conversations and sessions leading up to NEST30, which has been scheduled to hold from October 14 to 16, 2024. So I'll just say a little bit about the Mining Thematic Group for those that do not know. The Mining Thematic Group is a dedicated platform under the Manufacturing and Mining Policy Commission that is focused on enhancing the policy and business environment of the Nigerian mining sector to make it become a key driver of A, broad-based development and economic growth, B, industrialization, and C, diversification, all in line with the African mining vision. The thematic group brings together experts and leaders from both the public and private sector who volunteer their time and expertise to influence policy change in the mining sector. The group is organized into two working groups. The thematic group is organized into two working groups. The first is the policy working group, and then we also have the structural working group. The policy working group focuses its advocacy activities on strengthening Nigerians' mining policy, legislation, regulation, and practices. On the other hand, the structural working group focuses its advocacy activities on promoting competitiveness, business environment initiatives such as Nigeria's mineral exploration industry and the mining finance ecosystem, and nurturing a Nigerian junior mining sector. So we invite you to join us in this thematic group in shifting sector norms and shaping the future of Nigeria's mining sector. Once again, welcome to the pre-summit, and I look forward to the engagements that will follow. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. So who is coordinating?
So I'd like to invite our co-chair, Engineer Mansour Ahmed, to give us the chairman's opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Esteemed speakers, distinguished participants, let me add my warm welcome to that has already been stated to all our participants for attending this event. As has been said, these series of conversations that will precede the 30th Economic Summit are intended to prepare our minds for the summit that will come up in October. And I believe that the purpose, as has been said, is to enable us to think through the various policy options that in every sector that will be necessary to drive the Nigerian economy towards achieving its full potential. As most of us, as I'm sure most of us know, the Nigerian Economic Summit over the past 30 years has been the platform for bringing the public sector and private sector stakeholders together to discuss and agree on policies and strategies that we must adopt in order to drive our economy towards achieving its full potential. The particular subject we're discussing at this summit, at this occasion, is on the mining sector in particular. Now, we all know that despite its huge potential, the Nigerian mining sector has not achieved its potential at all. Indeed, quite on the contrary, it has been the theater for all sorts of conflicts, terrorism, banditry, and the theater where we expect to derive economic benefits has become perhaps one of the poverty-ridden locations in our country. So clearly, despite the effort to transform the sector through various policies over the past 20 years or so, very little has been achieved. The mining sector has not contributed significantly or at all to the GDP of this country. But this is not perhaps unique to Nigeria. In fact, many African countries with a wealth of mineral resources have not been able to exploit those resources for the benefit of their people. And that is why in 2009, the African Union adopted the African Mining Vision, which is in fact a continental framework, policy framework that is intended to assist African countries to adopt policies, strategies, and approaches that will ensure that the mining sector in each country makes the contribution it should make. It is also intended to integrate the economies of Africa, particularly through joint action, through driving value chain integration that will ensure that Africa benefits maximally from its huge resources. It is also intended through this vision that we will adopt sustainable practices in our mining sector. And so the African Mining Vision clearly provides an opportunity for all countries, including Nigeria, to align their policies, their mineral policies, in order to adopt these laudable objectives of the African Union. And this discussion, therefore, is to try and identify and hold conversations on how we can align the Nigerian mining sector policies and strategies with the African Mining Vision. And I'm very delighted to welcome our keynote speaker, as well as our panelists that will enlighten us and lead the discussions in this regard. Subsequently, at the Nigeria Economic Summit 30, these discussions will be deepened with the hope that will come out with the policies and strategy recommendations that will enable us to begin to direct our mining sector appropriately. So without taking too much of your time, let me welcome all our participants and hope that by the end of this session, we will have concrete discussions and recommendations for follow-up at the summit in October. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you very much, our co-chair. Next, I'd like to invite the co-thematic lead for the mining thematic group to make a brief presentation that will set the context for the conversations that will follow. That is Professor Peter Akpa. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Let me join the previous speakers in welcoming us to this meeting. As you're aware, the title of the theme of our pre-summit is leveraging the African mining vision for Nigeria's mining industry transformation and growth. And in this context, the mining thematic lead looking at how to unlock Nigeria's mining potentials through a comprehensive policy and governance reforms. So I'll be speaking about contextualizing those reforms in the manner in which we believe we can. I guess the slides are up and we can look at it. So what is the main message and the key takeaway we want to take from this presentation? First of all is to note that the mining industry in Nigeria has historically contributed to the GDP of the country. If we look at the statistics from 1910 to 1970, the mining industry did contribute significantly to the economy. And that this went on until when oil was discovered and the sector was by and large neglected, or if you like, relegated to the background. But it is very clear that Nigeria still has a lot of mineral occurrences or resources that, if they are properly exploited, would also contribute significantly to the GDP and, of course, foreign revenue earnings and foreign exchange earnings of the country. So we believe that the potential is there. However, we have not been able to realize the potential over the years, and a lot of reforms had taken place, particularly the ones that we started from 2005 upwards. The essence of all of these reforms was to properly place the sector on a pedestal that would enable it attract the necessary investments and contribute to the country's GDP, revenue earnings, and foreign exchange earnings. The purpose and what the Nigeria Economic Summit Group really had realizes that there's a need for us to do this, but we can only do it successfully through a comprehensive mineral policy or mining policy that is fully aligned with the African mining vision and also Africa Agenda 2050. So in this regard, the belief of the Nigeria Economic Summit Group is that if we have a comprehensive mining policy that fully aligns with the African mining vision, it will provide the basis for the development and growth of the industry generally. And so what are the issues that we need to begin to examine in this drive to have a comprehensive mining policy? It's one, we note clearly that the contribution of the sector to GDP is still very low at 1% of GDP. We also note the fact that up till now, the country has only one large scale mine operating in the country, Segilola in Osun State, and that there's low exploration investments in the sector. We also note that investors in this sector face a lot of barriers that has hindered investment or indeed contributed to creating an unfavorable operating environment for the country. We also know that the sector is beset with a lot of environmental and social impacts attributable mostly to illegal mining activities. And recently, we have experienced increased security challenges based on the exploitation of minerals across the country, particularly in conflict areas, particularly in the northwest of the country. We also know that the sector does have or is affected by weak regulatory enforcement, which has contributed to some of the disorderly activities that we're talking about. So these are the issues that have prompted us to begin to ask whether indeed it needs a proper policy framework that will provide the guidance sector players with a view to ensuring that the sector is properly positioned. So what are the key binding issues that we believe we should consider in this regard? First, we want to look at the fact that there's no sector regulator for the mining sector. Unlike other economic sectors like petroleum, for instance, we have two independent regulators. We have two independent regulators for the oil and gas sector, while we don't have a regulator for the mining sector at all. And this has created a number of challenges in the development of the sector. Another problem that we do have is the fact that the governance of the sector does not take into consideration the subnationals. So you have a governance framework that has only the federal government involved. The subnationals are completely out of the picture. And this has created conflicts in the sector in the sense that the federal government that issues licenses, the minor goes to the states and the states is confronted with another regulatory maze altogether, sometimes even the banning of mining activities and so on. So the non-inclusion of the subnationals in the governance of the sector is a big challenge that we need to look at it. And then we consider the issue of the exploration strategy that had been deployed over time, which seemed to have emphasized more of greenfield discoveries rather than trying to reopen legacy mines and deposits. The point we are making here is that the strategy that has been adopted seems to operate as if Nigeria had no mining history at all. And the idea now is that we should begin to look at our legacy mines, to opening them up and preparing them for investment. Countries that have done this have been able to attract sufficient investment in the mining sector. And we believe that that should also be done as far as the Nigerian mining sector is concerned. Of course, there's a weak linkage of the mining sector to other economic sectors, which is also responsible for why our mining industries seem to be developing in enclave rather than its multiplier effect felt by other economic sectors of the country. So there's a need for sufficient linkage between the mining sector and the other economic sectors to ensure that the benefits are duly achieved. So some recommendations have been made in this regard, and those recommendations are based on the study conducted by the Nigeria Economic Summit Group that was founded by Ford Foundation. And whereas there are so many recommendations that people can make regarding how the sector should be developed, the study actually has pigeonholed some of these recommendations into four main ones. The first one has to do with the issue of long-term reform for the sector. In this regard, the recommendation is that we convene a stakeholder summit to develop a comprehensive long-term mining policy that aligns with the African mining vision. The African mining vision was adopted by the African Union heads of state as far back as 2009. Now, Nigeria, like other member states of the AU, was supposed to develop their own country visions and also align their mining policies to this continental framework. We are yet to do that, and the benefit that would ought to accrue to us as a result of this is at this moment eluding us completely. And so there's a need for us to completely reform our mining policy and align it with the African mining vision. So that is a long-term reform proposal that we're talking about. And we believe that if we have that comprehensive mining policy in place, it will also set the stage for other framework, like the legal framework and the institutional framework that we need. It is from the policy that we will determine the kind of laws that we need, the ones that are existing that need to be amended to make them fit for purpose. Also, it's from that policy that we can determine the kind of institutions that we should have in place to drive the development of the sector. And so this is very important for us. And I think the policy framework that will enable us to determine all of this is important. Also, in this regard, the recommendation is that the Bureau for Public Enterprises and the Ministry for Solid Minerals Development should collaborate and drive this policy and then legislative reforms and institutional reforms that we are talking about. Because the ministry itself will not be able to do this effectively. So we believe that BP, having driven several other reforms in other economic sectors, is in a better position to work together with the ministry to be able to now fashion out this policy and also the legal and institutional reforms that are required to ensure that it works effectively. Then on the issue of policy implementation, again, we believe that the Ministry of Solid Mineral Development should begin an urgent process of implementing, at least in the short term, structural reforms alongside these proposals for policy reform so that we can develop Nigeria's exploration industry and mining finance ecosystem. When all of this is done, what are the expected outcomes from all of this? Number one, we believe that if these recommendations are taken on board and implemented effectively, there will be an increased contribution to GDP, and the estimate is that it will get to about 2.35% from the current level. There will also be attraction of foreign investments into the sector, and then, of course, creation of jobs, increased creation of jobs in the sector, and of course, there will be a diversified portfolio for government revenue, earnings, and foreign exchange, which all together would stimulate economic growth. So these are the reasons why the Nigeria Economic Summit feels that a comprehensive mining policy in the manner in which we have suggested will be key to driving the development of the sector. I thank you for your kind attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Prof, for that brilliant presentation, setting the context, identifying the issues that have been plaguing the sector and making a case for reform, and also shedding light on the roadmap that has been proposed by the NESG. So next, we'll have a keynote address delivered by Mohululu Nwebe, who's the Programs Officer of the African Minerals Development Center. And so he will be speaking about the importance of mainstreaming the AMV in Nigeria's mineral policy. And after the keynote address, which would also be setting the context for the panel session that will follow. Thank you very much. I'll hand over to you.
Thank you. I have to confess that after the two speakers that have gone by, the opening remarks and the context-setting presentation, it's as if mine is just to reaffirm that the two speakers not only know what they are talking about, but make our life easier as the African Minerals Development Center in engaging with Nigeria moving forward in terms of leveraging the AMV into Nigeria's economic trajectory. So as introduced, my name is Mkhululi Nwebe. I am the Programs Officer at the African Minerals Development Center. The African Minerals Development Center is the specialized agency of the African Union that is tasked with implementing and collaborating with member states in implementing the Africa Mining Vision. You would say we are the ones who, when the Africa Mining Vision is not working in any country, the question should be, why is AMTC watching it fail? So we have a long and hard task in terms of ensuring that the AMV is mainstreamed by countries. But with that in mind, let me just speak to the small speech that I was tasked with giving. And then from there, I think from the recommendations, we can move forward in terms of how we can engage with each other in ensuring that Nigeria's mineral policies and regulations are in line with the AMV. As mentioned by I think by everybody who has spoken before me, the AMV was adopted by African heads of state as a continental framework to optimize benefits of mineral resources for Africa's development. This was, of course, cognizant of the unfortunate situation where Africa's wealth in terms of natural resources was coexisting side by side with progressive poverty. So in 2009, the African heads of state, after a 3-year process of creating a document known as Africa's and Minerals and Africa's Development, was done by an international study group to review Africa's mining codes, had finished its work. That is how the information that actually informed the AMV and its tenets came to be after that document was published in 2007. So the AMV then seeks to be holistic in advocating for development beyond mining. It ensures that there's a maximizing of inter and intra-mineral mining sectoral linkages. It seeks to facilitate industrialization through the development of sectors downstream of mining, and particularly manufacturing, construction, power, agriculture. These are the 3 or 4 sectors that will develop the continent for the next 20, 30 years. We have been what we consider the consumer of the end products of these, rather than actually being the primary producers of what should come from manufacturing, construction, power, and agriculture. So the AMV is linked to this, and it goes beyond, and thus it goes beyond being a mining-only development strategy, as it proposes ways to develop knowledge linkages from skilling to technology development, and for beneficial spillovers into the rest of the African economy. And if we are speaking to Nigeria, the rest of the Nigerian economy. As mentioned by the previous speaker, with less than 3%, I think it's 1.7%. Some documents say it's close to 2%, but to just be sure, The solid mineral sector contributes way less than 3% to the country's GDP. And as such, the AMV calls for, if we are to bring on the solid mineral sector into Nigeria's development trajectory, for a transparent, equitable, and optimal exploitation of mineral resources that will underpin a broad-based, sustainable growth for the continent, for the country and continent, and of course, socioeconomic development. So in terms of that, we then start thinking of what the overview of Nigeria's mineral sector looks like. We are talking of gold, iron, lead, zinc, coal, and gemstones being what is traditionally, or what was traditionally known to be contributing to Nigeria's solid mineral sector before oil and gas took over. And as such, that country's development potential is something we can now start to bring back. And the geological setting of mineral deposits spans the whole country in different areas. And as such, those partial but linked opportunities for exploration and extraction are within the vein of the AMV. And if these resources are harnessed effectively, of course, Nigeria has the potential to drive economic growth, generate employment opportunities, and achieve better overall development for not only Nigeria, but also the rest of the sub-region vis-a-vis ECOWAS. In a sense, this achieves economic diversification from oil and gas in a manner that will revamp sectoral policies, regulations, and laws in infrastructure and finance, and to ensure that the attendant host of socioeconomic development cutting across Nigeria's demographic dividend is taken advantage of, considering that Nigeria is the most populous nation on the continent, let alone in ECOWAS. So the key principles that we would want to speak to when we are talking of the AMV and how we will be going beyond minerals if Nigeria is to seriously adopt the AMV, we should take into account the fact that the African Union commodity strategy works hand in hand or hand in glove with the Africa Mining Vision. The commodity strategy itself was adopted by ministers of industry and trade in September 2021, and it widens the scope of resource-based industrialization beyond mining. If you're to think of the fact that they say, I think coconut kernel, or is it cocoa kernels, well, or both rather, can be used as activated carbon in gold mining. You start thinking of how, when you're doing coconut farming, or should we say, yeah, coconut farming or cocoa farming, you are linking it to mining. It's that level of thought process that you would want to have emboldened in terms of AMV deployment within a country. The commodity strategy itself, of course, is built on the foundations of natural resource endowment beyond just minerals, and the vision on how to harness that development. The AU commodity strategy resonates with Agenda 2063, and it envisions commodities contributing to an integrated, prosperous, and peaceful Africa, driven by its own citizens and representing a dynamic force in the international arena. Right. That linkage with the AMV is such that you see how the AMV and the commodity strategy are linked to what I'm going to mention now, vis-a-vis the 4 pillars of the commodity strategy. Speak to linkages and diversification being the first pillar, skills development and the RDI being the second pillar, commodity markets and pricing being the third pillar, and then governance and in the enabling environment being the final pillar. So those 4 pillars are on which the AU commodity strategy sits, and they are not devoid of the way the AMV's pillars are actually built up. So incidentally, the deliberations of this Nigerian Economic Summit 30, NES 30, is dimensioned across 5 sub-themes. We notice that the 5 sub-themes actually are aligned to these 4 pillars of the commodity strategy. Vis-a-vis linkages and diversification, links to fostering inclusive development. Skills development and RDI is linked to igniting innovation and digital evolution. The commodity markets and the commodity markets and pricing is linked to unleashing business dynamism. And then the final one, governance and enabling environment, links to two pillars or two sub-themes of NES 30 vis-a-vis promoting stakeholder collaboration and building a more secure society. So on that last pillar of governance and enabling environment, right, we are looking at ensuring that we promote stakeholder collaboration, build a more secure society, and then it links to the main theme of collaboration, collaborative action for growth, competitiveness, and stability. So in all that, we realize there is nothing different in terms of how the AMV, it's as if we have looked, which is a good thing, we have looked at how the AMV is supposed to be delivered and how NES 30 is actually bringing out the sub-themes of the AMV, but in a manner that is understood beyond just the mining sector. So in terms of the challenges and opportunities of implementing the AMV in Nigeria, we start by, first of all, celebrating that Nigeria is the latest country to fully ratify the AMDC statute. It did so by depositing the elements of ratification to the African Union on the 7th of February 2024 this year. This was just after the mining endeavor, and hence it positions Nigeria as amongst the first 15 founding members of the AMDC. And so for that reason, we are delighted that cross-cutting economic forums such as NES 30 are taking on the ethos of walking the talk by inviting AMDC to give this address, whilst it speaks as well to leveraging the African mining vision for Nigeria's mining industry. The other three founding members at the moment are Guinea, Mali, and Zambia. And you will notice that for Guinea and Mali, unfortunately, because of the little tiffs that are, we'll call them teething problems that are happening in terms of its own self-determination. Zambia and Nigeria then become the countries that we want to work on when it comes to gemstones and jewelry. So Zambia last year hosted the very first African gemstone jewelry exhibition and conference as a ratified member state of the AMDC statutes. And this year, within 6 weeks, Nigeria will be hosting AJEC Lagos, which is the Africa Gemstone Jewelry Exhibition and Conference. Nigeria, AJEC Lagos, AJEC Nigeria, as a ratified member state. And so the challenges of revitalizing and revamping the solid mineral sector in Nigeria may seem to be a relevant factor in ensuring that we diversify beyond Nigeria's oil and gas sectors. And as much as they may seem insurmountable in terms of moving away from oil and gas, that challenge is actually an opportunity in terms of changing the status quo by ensuring that business will be done unusual, especially when it is looked at from a lens of the strategic futures foresight. And in terms of strategic futures foresight, you think of the fact that oil and gas, according to the global development agenda, will not be with us after a good 35 or so years. So from the methodology that we have been working with other think tanks on the continent in terms of futures foresight and envisioning, we also realize because of the need for Nigeria to work within its solid minerals sector, it actually presents Nigeria as the next powerhouse as well, considering the continually discovered lithium deposits that are currently on the down low in terms of being announced in terms of reserves. But fortunately, we also have our own intelligence that shows us that Nigeria definitely does have a significant amount of lithium deposits, as well as other energy deposits, energy mineral deposits, which ensures that as much as it may be declassifying itself as an oil and gas country, with solid minerals coming into play vis-a-vis lithium, manganese, the zirconiums and whatever, it shows us that the potential for Nigeria to come back, or rather to maintain its lead on extractives, is still holding on. And so as such, we ensure that Africa will no longer settle as the role of delegated producer to export these raw materials. The idea is to then ultimately be a leader in clean energy production, of which Nigeria is poised to become that. But that cannot be done without the tenets of the AMV, because local beneficiation and local value addition is the priority. In this respect of the envisioning of the future in terms of future green minerals, the African Union through the AMTC is pleased to be actively involved in the initiative that was led by the African Development Bank, or should we say that we co-led in championing an African green mineral strategy. And the African green mineral strategy is Africa's response to critical minerals or critical raw minerals demands in the world, of course. And the reason we're calling them green minerals, I'm sure for those who are aware of this, is because the term critical means that without our exploitation or extraction of these minerals, our lives would come to a halt as Africa, which is not the case. We could sit on our so-called critical minerals deposits as a continent, and life would continue for us at the moment. Of course, for the next 5 or so years, would ensure that we would then need to increase our own industry because the rest of the world would come to a halt. So they are critical to the rest of the world, but they're not yet critical to us. And hence, we have led the African Green Mineral Strategy of ensuring that conditions flowing from the energy transition that is happening right now, we augment the existing body of mineral development policies with the focus on the opportunities created by these green minerals. So this serves as an opportunity for Nigeria to engage with these mineral policies in alignment with the AMV, as the African Green Mineral Strategy is a direct distillation of the AMV and its tenets. But the fortunate part of the African Green Mineral Strategy is that it actually has practical options that the continent as a whole, let alone Nigeria, may undertake in following through and depending on a country's comparative advantage within the bigger continental agenda of minerals beneficiation. So the African Green Mineral Strategy ensures that the issue of resource-based industrialization is concrete and practical through crafted targeted strategies that member states, such as Nigeria, may adhere to, and through regional cooperation, which is the best approach to achieve industrialization and economic diversification on the continent, considering that our borders were created by virtue of colonial masters. When we think of the Green Mineral Strategy and its articulation and how we have to industrialize using the green minerals, we go beyond borders. We think of regional approaches with a country, with a region like SADC having a regional mining vision that
Ululi, you're mute. Okay.
Am I still mute?
No, you're okay now.
Okay, I'm sorry. Oh, it seems I'm receiving that a message that the internet connection is not stable. I am sorry about that. So as I was saying, the regional approach and the regional cooperation is what is required for the African Green Mineral Strategy to move and for countries like Nigeria to take advantage of. So it is also our expectation as AMTC that the draft African Green Mineral Strategy is currently being considered by African member states, no less in Nigeria as well, as senior officials and ministers during the 4th ordinary session of the Specialized Technical Committee of Trade, Tourism, Industry, and Minerals adopted, or should we say, accepted that the Green Mineral Strategy needed further consultation within member states. And that is the hope that Nigeria, as a ratified member state, is currently undergoing that consultation. And if not, this NES 30 is actually a potential platform in October to ensure that that in-depth consultation actually happens, or in-depth, interrogation of the Green Mineral Strategy actually happens. And with that, I will then come back to, or should I say, I'll wrap up this keynote address by mentioning the few recommendations what AMV, or how Nigeria can actually mainstream the AMV in its mineral governance. frameworks. We'll start with the fact that the Country Mining Vision Guidebook actually exists, and this is amongst the AMV implementation tools that have existed since, I think the Country Mining Vision has existed since 2014. And then, of course, there is, for Nigeria as our latest ratified member state, we are foreseeing, or we're actually planning, an African Minerals Governance Framework Assessment of Nigeria that starts probably the last quarter of 2024. That should be probably a few weeks after NES 30. And we are hoping that the audience that will be at NES 30 will actually be part of the Mineral Governance Framework Assessment that will start in Nigeria, and to see whether or not, or how deeply the AMV is being mainstreamed within Nigeria's mineral governance and other sectors. And then, of course, there is the participation in the African Mineral Resources and Energy Classification Framework, as well as the Pan-African Resources Reporting Code deployment that we are hoping will actually follow through at the third quarter, as well, at the final quarter of the year as well. Hoping that Nigeria will be amongst the few countries to actually adopt it. This will be to ensure that there is linkages with the Nigerian Stock Exchange and Nigerian capital markets. And as such, Nigeria will become not only a country that's working towards ensuring that it mainstreams its solid minerals back into its economy, but it actually leads the rest of the continent in terms of deploying local resources for local beneficiation, using the knowledge that we have of our own mineral resources on the ground. I mean, to put things into perspective, when it comes to Amrek Park, South Africa is known and seen as the most advanced mining jurisdiction on the continent. But that is because they actually have the South African Mineral Resources and Energy Classification Framework, right? And so they've linked SAMREC, the way they are going to do exploration within South Africa, to the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. With Amrek Park, we can actually have it adopted in Nigeria, and then that links it to the Nigerian Stock Exchange for people to invest in mining and exploration within Nigeria through the Nigerian Stock Exchange. So this then wraps up my very short keynote address, or should I say my short address, because keynote would have brought in a lot of unknown things, but I see I am only a mere affirmer of what the rest of the panelists seem to be having. And so I will now wait and see how far we'll go with the rest of the session. With those words, I'll say thank you, and I am done.
Okay. Thank you very much, Muhululu. And that was indeed a keynote address. It was very informative. I think what I noted in particular was the building blocks that you mentioned for the AMV and the synergies that we have with NES 30, which shows that we're on the right track in terms of advocacy, and also the recommendations of low-hanging fruits for mainstreaming the AMV for the Nigerian mining sector. Thank you very much. It properly sets the tone, I think, for the panel sessions that will follow. And at this point, I would like to hand over to the facilitator of the Manufacturing and Mining Policy Commission of the NESG, Amanda Monfisi, who will moderate the panel session and introduce the panelists. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jumoke, and thank you to everyone who's joined us today. Thank you, Mr. Muhululi Nwebe, for your brilliant, for setting the tone of this event, introducing us to the AMV and the various linkages to even the NES 30. So I'll start with our panelists today. We will start with in the panel session, we'll start with the private sector operators on the panel. We want to get their perspective, receive their perspectives of the current operating environment for mining in Nigeria. And then we will we'll hear from our panelists from the public sector, who will give us also perspectives from, from their work. So as we have today on the panel, Mr. Dele Ayonleke. He is the National President of the Miners Association of Nigeria. We also have Mrs. Amina Sijoade. She's a director of the Iron Ore Mining Limited. We have Prince Adetokunbo Kayode. He's the President, Nigeria Private Sector Alliance. We have Dr. Bunaya Oji. He is the Executive Secretary of the Nigerian Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative. We also have Mr. Ayodeji Ario Beli, the Director General of the Bureau of Public Enterprises. He is represented by Mr. Abdulkader Ahmed, who is a director for the solid minerals for the Department on Handling Natural Resources, within the Bureau of Public Enterprises. So start with Mr. Ayonleke, Mr. Dele Ayonleke, the National President of the Miners Association of Nigeria, MAN for short. So if you could please share your thoughts about the current state of the Nigerian mining sector in terms of the operating environment, what's the perspective from your members and the association itself? How easy or difficult has it been to operate, especially within the last year and since the last NEST 29 in 2003 October? Thank you. So sorry, you need to unmute, sorry.
Okay, good afternoon. Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. All right. Good afternoon, Amanda, and our distinguished members of MMPC, and of course, all the panelists and our keynote speaker. Please just kindly permit me to stand on the existing protocol. Talking about the current state of the Nigerian mineral industry, I think Professor Ape has actually done a very good work in that regard with his welcome address the other time. And I just want us to look at the current state from maybe just very few perspectives. The first perspective is about the increase in the volume of activities, maybe due to the discovery of the energy transition minerals in Nigeria. I think this one is a known fact for us, that on the discovery and the demand for lithium, well, the activities in the mining sector actually improved and increased tremendously. In fact, it has invited a lot of other foreign nationals to Nigeria to partake in the exploitation of our mineral resources due to the increase in demand for energy transition minerals. Another area of concern, especially talking about the state of the mining industry, is the increase on the unabated interference of subnationals. Professor Akwe also mentioned this in his remark, though from a different perspective. He thought that maybe the state government and some other subnational entities were not given enough role to play. We are looking at it from the angle that the present regulatory, legal and regulatory environment actually domicile the ownership and control of mining in the purview of the federal government of Nigeria. But what we are experiencing today is quite different from this particular stand. We see almost every state in the federation now coming up with structures, coming up with a lot of regulations to control the mining activities. Some went to the extreme of abandoning the Nigerian Minerals and Mining Act and establishing their own state executive orders, banning mining activities, and in some very serious cases, even destroying and vandalizing mining equipment of some operators in the business. So this is another area of concern. Like Amanda said, this development actually reached this peak about 12 months ago. because I remember when I came on board 12 months ago, the first issue I was to tackle to organize a press conference was on Taraba. And up to today, Taraba has not abated in bonding and vandalizing mining equipment of some operators. We also, apart from these kind of regulations, we also have this multiple enforcement of laws. It seems as if almost every agency, every security agency in the country today wants to enforce the mining laws. It's not even limited to federal agencies. We also have some regional and state agencies. Take, for example, I'm from Southwest. You see situations where the Amotekun, that's the regional security outfit of the Southwest, where some personnel of this agency are being used to enforce mining laws. And we also have state laws, state agency. I will still use the example for your state, an agency like Operation Bust, trying to arrest people, branding every miner on the street, on the road now as illegal miner. I think this calls for concern. And I think the last one that I want to mention, talking about the current state of the Nigerian mining industry, is the recently review of the title application fees and royalty rates. We all know that the rate at which this increase comes, even though the honorable minister and the ministry don't want us to target increase, they call it review. But definitely we discovered that there's none of these fees, none of these rates was reviewed downward. They are all upward reviewed. And the rates at which they are increased, they are so exorbitant. So these are just the some of the issues. I will agree with me that some of these bring positive and negative impact on the Nigerian mining space. Say, for example, the issue of increase in the volume of activities, I think it's a positive for us. But all the other factors which I just mentioned, seems to negate what should be the gain of the country through this increase volume of mining activities in Nigeria. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. So thank you for taking us through these issues.
I don't know whether I'll be permitted to speak about the impact of especially the last point that I raised, and that is on the upward review of the
Yes.
fees and
Go
rates.
ahead, sir.
Yeah. Yes, I'm going to be very brief on it. I want to observe that it definitely it's just too close to call for us to say what are the impacts. But when you see the rate at which all these fees are increased, some are as high as about 10,000% increase. And I think some in 1,000, 2,000, 3,000% increase. If you look at this rate, the reason why we cannot say much about the impact now is that we are still in a dialogue session with the Honorable Minister and the ministry. We met with the minister some 2 weeks ago, and he directed us to the committee that reviewed the mineral rates. Because even when you look at the royalty rates, it was discovered that there are some parameters are wrong. Take, for example, using wrong current market value. I want to use the example of lithium and coal. There is nowhere in the country where you can say any brand of lithium today at 3 million. And there is nowhere in the country where they are selling a ton of coal for 100,000 naira. So, and these are the kind of figures that were used to calculate the royalty rates. Meanwhile, we are still dialoguing with the ministry to make sure that there is a review of all these rates. Because if these things should allow to stay, it is capable of sending out a lot of indigenous miners from the mining business. And I think this one will contradict the social functions of government to make sure that the citizens are encouraged to partake in economic activities, especially from the God's endowment on the nation. So until then, we cannot actually say much about the impact, but definitely if that thing is allowed to stay, it will have very serious negative impact on the participation of Nigerian indigenous miners in the mining activities. Thank you very much.
Okay, so just one last question. Do you have any idea why the government took that decision to increase, well, you say review, but in reality, you say is increase, to increase these rates, and the increase, you're even talking about something about 10,000% increase in some instances. So is there what was the policy, what was the decision behind this policy move, and how come consultations are just going on now? Shouldn't consultations with stakeholders have happened intensively before it was announced?
Thank you very much. Actually, the stakeholders were called to tell us about the government's intention to review all those rates and fees. And our response that is because figure was not put to that dialogue on that particular, the first meeting we had with the ministry. It was just a statement of intention then. And we all agreed that there's imperative for review for so many reasons. Like I said earlier on, the improvement in the volume of mine activities also portend that government also should benefit from this scenario. And because of the fact that there is increase in the cost of running government business and things like that, we agree definitely that there needs to be a review. But the major reason why the government says that the review is so high to that extent is just to discourage speculations from the business. While we know, of course, that there are speculations, our thinking is just that the government should not just throw away the bathwater with the baby. As much as there are speculators, there are also genuine investors in the business, and their own plight also must be considered. We think there are some, assuming that we are invited, we are involved in the process, and we are told that this is one of the reasons, we will have looked at some other ways by which we can discourage speculation apart from this exorbitant increase in rates and fees.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. I have to move on to the next panelist so that we don't run out of time. Mr. Juade, we've heard a lot from the president of the Miners Association representing, so many miners in the sector. So maybe from your own company perspective and as an indigenous mining company, exploration and mining company, can you take us through how you see what the government can do to nurture nurture indigenous exploration companies? In South Africa, the Minerals Council has been pursuing a strategy for building a junior mining sector in South Africa. What measures do you think that the government can take here to encourage more indigenous participation in driving exploration? The president has just highlighted the challenges, or probably the motive of the federal government, the ministry, in trying to weed out speculators. But at the same time, how do we ensure that that doesn't harm our indigenous, an indigenous exploration industry from blooming? Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. And I'd just like to start with acknowledging and appreciating the speakers on this, attending this event, and my co-panelists. Thank you very much, the NESG, for this initiative, this effort. So the previous speaker, my president of the Miners Association, is well positioned to talk to us and inform us of what the current realities are in the sector. And I can see he focused on the topical issues, challenges, bedeviling the operating in the industry or in the sector. To answer your question, let me focus on some fundamental issues, which of course affect indigenous operators. Fundamental issues, number one, I'll try to be quite brief and run through them because a lot of information put before us has dealt with them already. For example, I'll start with legal and regulatory framework. A lot of the issues, I should note, I'm going to talk about are situations that have existed in the industry for a while, but need to be addressed. So the legal and regulatory framework, we all know the Mining Act, policy, drawn up. We are aware of the reforms that have been initiated, the mining policy, the roadmap, the regulations that follow the law have all existed for some time. The problem that we have had for so many years and still exists is implementation of these all the initiatives that I have mentioned. We also have, with the current government, we've had a few documents put forward, like the CDA guidelines. It's early days yet to see how that has worked. Implementation has been laudable, quite a lot of laudable provisions in these documents, but implementation has been very, very low. Currently, regarding the law, we are aware that the National Assembly is doing some work on some amendments of our Mining Act and the corporation we hear, but there's a lot of, we're quite hazy as to what point we are. So this is, the legal and regulatory space is an area that is fundamental, needs to be looked at, because as an indigenous company, you need to have a lot of certainty guiding your operations as far as all the provisions. Another thing quickly I'll mention is the sectoral administration. Again, we all know that the sector is administered by the ministry and the numerous agencies around it. Again, structure by and large, very good. Again, capacity, a big problem. Presence on ground. Administration in the sector exists mainly at the center, with barely any presence at the subnational and the local government level, which is the most important, since that is really at the local government and community level is where the actual mining takes place. So what happens is we have very little presence, very little knowledge or awareness of what government's policies and everything. And this is the space and the environment with which operators like us deal with, having to sometimes step in and show a presence that government is supposed to be showing. Next, I will go on to the facts, big problem that we as operators have had. Using our company as an example, we've been in the space for about, 15, 16 years, absence of geoscience data. A lot has been said about it in the past. We're not going to talk of where, I'm not going to spend too much time on it. Each successive administration that comes in talks about the acquisition of data by the federal government. This is traditionally a space that, or a gap that is covered by governments in more developed mining jurisdictions. In this country, we've heard a lot of talk. We've seen initiatives, notable the World Bank NIMET project. The actual position is that for the operators, for the companies, we really have nothing to rely on. This data is not available where it has been acquired. The question to ask is if it has been available to the general public. Even with the current administration, we're hearing a lot about acquisition of data, big data, big data. The important thing will be to make sure that when this data is available, is procured, it should be made available to the operating unit to help at least offset the heavy responsibilities that operators like us have to do. We have committed a lot of resources towards obtaining data, which has slowed development and, of course, by and large, the progress in the sector, because there are many like us. Quickly, I won't bother talking about mineral ownership and control. We know what the issue is in the Constitution and in our laws, our Land Use Act needs amendment. I've talked about geoscience, data, human resources, and capacity gap. Now,
sorry, can I just take you back to this comment, very important comment, where you talked about data. Government has invested heavily through the World Bank funded projects and NIMEP, but accessibility still still remains an issue. Though I'm aware of having worked on in the Mindara project myself, I'm aware that the NGSA, there's a geodata center where investors can log in and access some of the data that was generated, the airborne geophysics data, geochemical data, and
you're breaking up a bit.
I don't know what has been can you hear me?
I can now. You were just
so what has been your
bit.
experience? Okay. So you said that because of accelerator, and I would imagine many other indigenous or even foreign operators have also had to make their own investments into generating data that in other countries the government would have provided some pre-competitive data. So how has that affected your ability in attracting foreign investments and finance to support your exploration projects? If you can just give us a brief 2-minute response so that we can move on to the next button.
Okay, so thank you for bringing up the geodata point. Yes, that exists. I think the real question to ask is, yes, some data is available. The functionality it varies, and the depth or the level of the detail, should I say, in the information that's available generally to the public. Now, for my company, as you said, I mentioned already that it has meant, since we have had to commit considerable resources to obtaining this data externally, it has meant we have had to bear a very heavy financial, outlay, where this could have been alleviated by federal government's provision. Now, my experience mirrors what happens with a lot of Nigerian indigenous companies. Some might not have been as fortunate as we have been to acquire enough finances to do a very thorough and comprehensive exploration program. And this point is why a lot of Nigerian indigenous mining companies are failing to get off the starting block. Lack of funds to acquire data that traditionally and should have been provided by the federal government, willing to grow the sector.
Okay, sorry, now I have to move on to the next panelist so that we don't run out of time, but we'll come back to your comments, and in fact that would also feed into my the questions that I will ask the panelists, the DG of BPE. So Prince Kayode, you've also of the Nigeria Private Sector Alliance. It'd also be good if we could hear from you that your perspectives on how we can, having heard from the President of Miners Association and Ms. Sijuade about the current operating environment in Nigeria, and you've also heard from her the challenges they've had in accessing geodata and how expensive it has been also for them to generate their own data. Considering all these multidimensional issues and challenges in the sector, how crucial is it for Nigeria to develop a new mining policy that is aligned with the African mining vision policy framework? Prince Kayode, please. Is he still here? Oh, he must have dropped off.
Can we go to the next panelist?
Okay, so we'll go on to the next. Yes. Dr. Aji, the Executive Secretary of the Nigeria Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative. I'd like you to please share. Oh, sorry. Forgive me. Dr. Oji, please, I'll come back to you afterwards. I placed this in a certain order. So, Mr. Ahmed, Abdulkadir Ahmed of the Bureau of Public Enterprises.
Good afternoon.
You would agree with me. Yes, good afternoon. So you've heard from the private sector, the difficult operating environment that we have in the mining industry. There have been quite a lot of innovations and progress. But at the same time, I'm not sure that the mining sector, as the government envisaged in the early 2000s, you know, particularly that was a time when BPE, the Bureau of Public Enterprises, drove reforms, economic reforms. Sorry, Chairman, if you can mute, please. Okay, all right. So let me cut this short. Engineer Ahmed, you recall that in the Bureau of Public Enterprises, most of the economic reforms took place in the early 2000s up to around the mid 2000s. Quite a number of 2010, sorry, quite a lot of reforms took place alongside privatization of assets in some of those sectors. And I would highlight the telecom sector, established the NCC, and we've seen how much the telecom sector has grown. There's now an offshoot sector from that, the digital economy sector, which is quite a big sector in Nigeria. We've also seen the efforts that BP put into reforming the power sector, and then also even though you didn't conclude the process, but you started the process of reforming the petroleum sector through the policy. Can you take us through what's the structure of reforms in those sectors?
Okay. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, Amanda.
How did it start with? I know it started with policy, so if you can take us through. Okay.
For the situation now in the mining sector it's not different from what was obtained in 2000 when we took on the communication sector, and then the power in 2005, and later the petroleum sector. So what we had then was just as we have now in the mining sector, unregulated, a lot of confusion. You have too many people doing the same thing. You don't have a one-stop shop where you can be guided on how to operate in that sector. The essence of any reform is actually to provide what we call efficient, reliable, affordable, safe, and cost-effective system of operating within that sector. Basically, to regulate entry and exit. Now, in BPE, and I am happy to have our elder here, Engineer Osun Ahmed. He was part of most of our process when we started. The first thing we do is to establish what we call implementation committee or steering committee to be headed by, which is normally headed by the supervising minister. They come up with a policy, and it is this policy, from this policy, we're able to develop an act that will bring in a regulator. And I think for the mining sector, this is one thing that is very crucial and absent, because while the ministry is supposed to come up with the policy and then you have the regulator regulating the activities of that sector. Example is the power sector. You have the Ministry of Power giving policy, but then you have NAC regulating the industry. They issue license for if you want to participate in any segment of the value chain. And also in the communication sector, we have the Ministry of Communication issuing policies, and then you have the NCC regulating. When we took over in 2001, the number of lines in Nigeria was about 450 lines, and then the tele-density was less than 1%. But today, as we speak, we have over 156 million internet subscription, and then about 118% when you look at what obtained in 2001. So, and for the petroleum industry, again, we had, yes, you're correct. We started the process, but was concluded by some other agencies. But the aim was actually achieved because two regulators were established, one for the upper upstream, and then you have, excuse me, one regulator regulating both the midstream and the downstream, and also introduces efficiency because a number of some existing petroleum agencies had to go, and then some other ones were brought in. The same thing happened in the power sector, where a number of, like from NEPA, we had 11 distribution company, 6 generation companies, and 1 transmission company coming out of that effort. So what I'm trying to bring out here is that by the time you look at what is required in the mining sector, primarily in order to key into the African mining vision, which is very clear. So this can also be adopted towards bringing up whatever regulatory, legal and regulatory framework that is needed to ensure that we have a regulator in this sector. I had my previous, the previous speakers loud and clear. If you look at it very well, just for lack of time, if you look at it very well, most of the issues that have been identified, if you have a regulator in place, like Mr. Dele Anyaleke said, the issue of when they were asked to review before, if you have a regulator in place and you know its functions, which will be contained in the act, you know when a review is coming up, and you have parameters. Somebody cannot just wake up and say, okay, this is how much you are paying. He said, if I hear him correctly, that the price they use for some of these minerals are not obtainable. But somebody just sat down in an office and then came up with, look at what you have in the power sector. The NAC is in charge of tariff. When they brought out their review, the last 6 months, everybody was aware, even though people were not happy, but at least you know what you are going in for, not that somebody will just come up with. So the most important thing for us is to have a regulator in this sector, because this regulator will be able to bring in all the various policies, there are a number of policies all over the place, and then so that they can bring them into one shop, and then be able to meet the earnings of the Nigerians. So that's just basically I try to extrapolate everything. There are processes, of course. You have the policy, you have to take it to National Assembly, and then everybody, every stakeholder within the sector must agree on a vision. Where do we want this sector to be? I hope I've answered your...
Yes, in fact, that was the conclusion I was hoping you would get to, where you say that the starting point, yes, we need a regulatory commission, but the
Yes.
starting point is that at this stage, Nigeria needs a new mining policy
Yes, we
that
do.
is developed by all stakeholders at
All
the federal,
stakeholders.
at the subnational level, from different MDAs that are critical to mining sector development,
Yes.
using the African mining vision
Yes.
as a policy framework,
Yes.
so that we derive the benefits, linking the mining sector with the rest of the economy. Mrs. Sijuade talked about the difficulties with accessing funding, and Mr. Nwebe had already mentioned of the AMDC, that there are systems also under the AMV to link the mining sector to the capital market so that investors can easily access funding for their operations. Prince Kayode, we're running out of time though, but if you can, under 4 minutes, having heard, I called you earlier, but I couldn't, I think the system logged you out. How crucial is it, having heard all these conversations, the several multidimensional issues confronting the mining sector, how crucial is it to develop a new mining policy, and then using the African mining vision as the framework for developing that policy through a shared or an inclusive stakeholder process, to develop such a policy? Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. It's great that Nigeria has finally signed on the AMV. And the framework, part of the tools of the African mining vision is the country mining vision, which you can easily adopt. You must have a vision first before you have a policy. Thereafter, the legal framework, plans, implementations, legal framework, the milestones and timelines. So our work is well cut out for us, but I think part of the key issues really is the fact that there seems to be a lot of things to be done. And as usual, everybody thinks somebody will do it, but nobody will do what everybody thought somebody will do. So where do we start? How do we start it? I want to charge NESG on this matter. Before October, before the 30th meeting, I think it would be important for us to put in actually the milestones. Let us craft a vision. Let us craft a policy. Let us craft plans, implementation plan. Okay, this can be crafted as a draft, which all the stakeholders that come from the breakout from the 30th meeting can look at it, and this cannot be pushed forward. You see, most times we expect government to do a lot of things or everything, but don't forget that there are many interests within the government. The Ministry of Solid Minerals has its own interests, and there are some things, of course, they will not necessarily want to yield easily. But we in the private sector understand this, and that's why we must support government to help them to achieve it. Using the CMV, the country mining vision, the resources of the AMDC, thank God, appreciate the presence of the keynote speaker. He has indicated, without saying so much, that there are a lot of resources there which we can use. And of course, we can also learn from other countries that have gotten it right. There's nothing bad in learning. So we can actually be able to look at this. We can establish a regulatory body, which I agree absolutely with, help to reorganize, propose reorganization of the ministry, plug the governance gaps, especially with the respect of the laws and the regulation, settle the issue of environmental and social impact, because this is very critical. Then the issue of licensing regimes, all this can be included in, of course, the issue of data. NIMEP has done a lot of work, but how do you bring that data into the marketplace? And finally, finally, two vexed issues. The issue of the artisanal and small-scale mining, which is a recipe for disaster, as you can see what's happening in Zamfara and in Niger State, and even in Oyo State, as well as the issue of the federalization, being able to have a federal partnership whereby the federal government, the state government, and local government will work in tandem without necessarily working across purposes. So some of all these are issues that we can easily put in place in the vision and the policy, and also help us to finally create a mining economy. We do not have a mining economy yet, and we cannot. It is when we put all these together, without taking them in piece, we put them together, that we begin to develop a mining economy that will understand that mining itself is just a starting point for a larger economy. For instance,
beneficiation is an industrial act. It's not a mining act. In fact, immediately you dig minerals from the ground, the role of mining has virtually ended. You go to beneficiation, you bring money to industry, and being able to develop an economy that ensures that we stop thinking of exporting raw.
So you've gone off. You've gone mute, sir.
We can hear him.
Okay.
We are hearing him. We are hearing him.
Okay. Sorry, it was my end. Sorry.
Is muting me, but okay. So the point I'm making is that we need to develop a mining economy, an economy that shakes hands with the industry. For instance, the Ministry of Solid Minerals and the Ministry of Trade and Industry are twins. They must work together because immediately you dig the minerals from the ground, that's the end of mining. The other one is industry, beneficiation, processing, transportation, logistics, and so on and so forth. So, and you see, another problem is that the new regulation which must put in place must ensure that there's an overarching body.
The Mets, sir.
Yes, I'm coming to that. That there's an overarching body that helps to control the relationships. And finally, the issue of MET, mining equipment and technical services. This is not mining per se. This is actually another industry. Because without those equipments, without the logistics, you can't mine. So, and this is embedded. So we need to be able to properly, clearly line out the work, the value chain and the linkages of the work, the roles everybody will play. Division, if you look at the vision, I've interrogated the AMV severally at several forums, and I've seen that they've tried to pinpoint this, the role of each of these linkages within the framework of the mining sector. So I want to challenge NSG, take this matter, don't kick the can down the road to government because it will still be where we are just, next year, year after. But if you take the bull by the horn and really begin to give proposals to government on specific proposals, they will be able to take it up. We know how the system works, but we need to support the system, and it will be done. I think the current minister has interest in getting this done, but you need to hold his hand and help him. I think we can leave this at this moment because I have
all right.
Sorry, I missed it the other time.
Yes, sir. Yes. Thank
Amanda,
you very much, sir.
Amanda, can I make a quick comment on this matter? Because I think it's very important. Hello?
Amanda has frozen.
Okay, so I wanted to go to the last speaker. Do you want, sir?
Okay, let's
go on to the last panelist.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, sir. If you can just hold your thoughts, sir.
We'll
go to the last panelist, and then we start with you. We'll open the Q&A with you, or your commentary from you, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, so Dr. Orji, if you can please unmute, and you've heard a lot from the panelists. Yes, sir, you've heard a lot from the panelists. So basically what the NESG is has proposed, and what's even from this panel session is that, there are critical reforms that are required in the mining industry. And it's not just piecemeal reforms of, pick one law and amend it or just develop a new law and so on, but that we need to go back to the basics and develop a new mining policy. As you see from our interrogation of the process, Mr. Ahmed mentioned this, we had the Mining Act coming before the mining policy. So we had the Mining Act in 2007, and then the policy in 2008, then regulations much later in 2011. Is that no wonder that the sector is, operators and all stakeholders are crying about the status of the sector. Had we developed a new mining policy first, with all stakeholders involved in developing that policy, I think that we would have, had a collective vision of how we wanted to shape the industry. So, sir, having in NATI, published reports on the solid mineral sector, your solid mineral sector reports for the mining industry, and the efforts you put into pushing the advocating for the passage of the can we learn from the efforts efforts you put at NATI into ensuring that the petroleum industry bill was enacted to address oil and gas remediation issues. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Amanda. And I would like to thank.
If you can wrap speaking would help.
Please, are you hearing me?
Yes, sir. Can hear you.
Yeah, I would like to thank all the distinguished guests that have spoken, my fellow panelists and fellow participants. And I think they have all summarized everything that needs to be done. All of them point to the same issue that NATI has been pushing for attention and priority attention to be paid to the solid mineral sector. And NATI's specific role in all of this is on data and information. And that was why our first engagement with the sector was to conduct a scoping study. And that scoping study specified exactly what needs to be done, who is to do what, when, and how. But we are very surprised that that has not been given very kind attention that it should deserve. We are still all focused and fixated on the oil and gas. And that was why our last report was in 2021. I joined this meeting late because I had some flight problems. I'm arriving Lagos this morning, getting into Lagos. We are currently on validation and reconciliation of data with the extractive companies here in Lagos, which began yesterday and will last for the whole of this week, to enable us to release 2022 and 2023 reports together, hopefully on September 24 this year. But when you even publish these reports, at some point you ask yourself, why are the issues persistently the same? The kind of attention you need to give to the solid minerals, which many of the speakers have highlighted. For instance, if we look at our 2021 report, which we're working on now, the number of companies that we're dealing with is 1,214. We dealt with in 2021 is 1,214, and we dealt with three extractive, three covered entities. That's the ministries: Mining Cadastral Office, Mining Inspectorate Division, and there are three, and FRS. So when we look at all this, you find that the whole total revenue that we have generated in the sector since 2021, 2007, when we began to collect data, was only 193.59 billion. That's what the sector has generated since 2023, since 1990, 2007, and today. And this represents only less than 1%, 0.68% of our GDP. And then you look at the whole total companies, the specific solid minerals we're dealing with. 78% of them, majority of them are only limestone. And then, so we have this presentation, which I implore you to please, they simplify them because of time to share with all the participants. I've sent them to you across to look at the data, because the speaker, the data speaks to specific issues. Our concern is that you can only make informed decisions if you have information and data. And NATI's specific role in the current advocacy for solid mineral reforms is on data. But to come to the specific issues we looked at in that report, we were looking at the key solid minerals that are driving the economy in that space, and how we can invest maximally for this. Many of the speakers have spoken on Lego framework. That is one. We equally recommended that they needed to be a strong company, whether it's going to be government-driven or public sector-driven is a matter of debate. But we need a company like you have in the oil and gas, you have the NNPC. You will need a company, extending company. Since Nigerian Mining Corporation died, that vacuum is there. to be able to galvanize and drive its investment in that sector. We equally looked at a new law, complete new law, revising or reviewing the 2007 Mining Act may not really address this because a lot has changed. Similar to what we did in the PIA, we recommended the PIA because at that time, there was only the Petroleum Act of 1959. PIA lasted 18 years before it became law. As imperfect as it is, there is a law. And what we are working with now is on developing the regulations that will drive implementation of that law. Unfortunately, I served in the Presidential Committee on the implementation of the PIA, but we never concluded our job before the new administration came in. We're engaging with the new administration to look at the job we've done, even though it was not concluded, either completely jettison is set up a new team or reconstitute that committee, because it's important that we anchor the PIA implementation on a strategic plan. We have equally recommended that there should be a similar attention on a new legislation that will respond to exactly some of the issues the guest speaker that was speaking on the African mining vision before I came. We need to look at that African mining vision and see how a new law can align with the African mining vision, which is very key, because this investment in mining is across national boundaries, and it's an international business. So we also recommended that when you look at all the recommendations we made, we recommended that a new law should focus on defining a new fiscal regime for the sector. As we know, none exists now. Yeah, there were some mining rates were reviewed recently, but it is not enough to have regular reviews of risk. There should be a law that defines who gets what and how in the fiscal regime, just as we have achieved in the petroleum PIA. So we equally thought it's important at this moment to look at the legislation should be a legislation that is dynamic and flexible, that allows all three tiers of government to participate in mining. How that will be shaped and anchored, I mean, legal experts could look at it, but currently the law we have is regimented. It is not easy to get in. It is also not easy to get out. If you come to Abuja and obtain a mining license, you arrive in the state, the governor tells you he's the owner of all the lands in the state, and you have to now begin a new process. You arrive at the local government, you are confronted with local government and the host communities. No investor has all that kind of time and patience. So we need to see what has happened globally and see how this will help us in terms of comparative advantage and case studies and lesson peer learning. So we openly highlighted the fact that NAITI is concerned that transparency and accountability embedded in the reform process is key. And that is why we have provided enormous data that can really guide discussions in this area. Currently, I'm aware, and we are reviewing two legislations, one being driven privately by the National Assembly, House of Reps Committee, and even the Senate on solid minerals. We also have another draft, which we are reviewing, that came from the ministry. And we are wondering whether it will be possible for them to be a convergence, to have an acting law that addresses all the concerns. But our position that this kind of legislation should be an executive bill that should come from the government with all the weight and political capital that the president can invest on this. The current minister, we have been engaging with him. He's very interested that things should change, but honestly, they need a lot of support. The mining officers that you have in the states are just there, just a mere representation. No funding, no facilities to work, no tools. If you go to the mining ministry itself, the Ministry of Solid Minerals, it's not very well equipped with professionals. The young, dynamic, and their operations need to be automated. There are a lot that can be done.
Sorry, can you try to wrap up?
Finally, I do think that if we pay special attention to the solid mineral sector, it could be Nigeria's response to the ongoing debate on energy transition. We have done a paper on this. We have shared widely, and we will also like to share as we engage further with the Nigeria Economic Summit Group. The risk of speaking last is exactly what I'm challenged with now. But I would like to thank you very much because I came last, so I spoke last. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you for sharing your perspectives. As you said, data is key, and we look forward to the updated reports for the mining sector. And I also noted your comments on how important it is to have the 3 tiers of government participate in the governance and development of the mining sector. At this stage, I'd like to call our co-chair, Engineer Mansour Ahmed, who wanted to make some comments. I hope he wrote them down so that he doesn't forget. Meanwhile, for others, please, for our audience, please, if you have any questions or comments, please drop them in the chat box. I can't see any. I can't see any at all. So if anybody has any question, please drop it in the chat box. We're not going to open the floor for people to ask. We will just read out the chats, please.
Amanda, we have questions in the Q&A. If you open the Q&A box, there's some questions there.
Okay, all right, I've seen that. So, Engineer, we'll just let Engineer Mansour Ahmed, our co-chair, to please make his comment first, and then I'll read out those comments and questions and direct them to the appropriate speaker. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amanda. I want to make just 2 quick comments. One is with regards to Prince Kayode's suggestion, basically challenging NESG to take the initiative in the process of developing a policy. I think this is a very good suggestion, and I hope that NESG will take that seriously. I think this will not be the first time. Sometime in 1997 or thereabouts, when I was in NESG myself, a similar issue rose with regards to policies on infrastructure and public-private partnership. And it was indeed NESG who, after convening a conference on the matter, actually proposed in their recommendation a new framework for public-private partnership in the development of infrastructure. And this was taken up by government, and subsequently the policy was introduced. I think the ICRC law was inaugurated. So I would like to see NESG taking this seriously with regards to the mining sector. And related to that, in my second comment, it has to do with the presentation of the on the mining vision by Mr. Nkululi. I believe that if NESG is going to do this work, it will need a lot of support and a lot of guidance, particularly if this is going to be developed, if the new policy framework is to be developed in line with the African mining vision. And I want to ask Mr. Nkululi, what support and assistance can the African Mining Development Center provide NESG in this regard? And I think this would be something that the two may have to work together to help so that the new policy framework is proposed in line with the African mining vision. Lastly, with regards to NITI, I think the comments, the last comments of the representative of NITI was very, very apt. The need to ensure that we have an anchor establishment. Now, he said it should be a public sector establishment. My own view is that no. I think we have now gotten to a point where we can actually promote the private sector with the support and necessary encouragement and whatever support is required to get major private sector enterprise, particularly Nigerian private sector enterprises in the mining sector, to create that kind of major outfit that will anchor the process. Otherwise, what will happen is that the sector will be really populated by a large number of small artisan miners, and those cannot create the momentum that we are looking for. This is why I think the observation by NITI that the contribution of the sector has been literally minimal, not because it is not producing revenue, but because this revenue is not getting to government because it's not large enough, it's scattered. So I think these two comments will be very valuable in our subsequent discussions at Next 30. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Most definitely, we've taken on the suggestions to drive advocacy is really around driving the development of a new mining policy anchored on the African mining vision. Mr. Nwebe, Mugululi, please, can you respond to the chairman's comment on, AMDC working with the Nigerian Economic Summit Group, though I know that your key partner in every country is the government, though.
Right. Thank you. I think this is a question that we both can answer as NESG and AMDC. The agreement, or should we say our acknowledgement to come and give the keynote presentation is obvious, for those who are not aware, is predicated by discussions that we have had with NESG, I think since March this year, whereby it was more or less agreed that, or rather NESG approached AMDC and explained to us how they intend on working in terms of bringing on board stakeholders that can actually support redrafting of mineral policy beyond just mining, beyond just the mining sector. And so our support to NESG, which we are also aware that NESG actually does have an interface with the government, is in a manner that will take NESG as a stakeholder that the government is aware of. And by so doing, like we're saying, when we have the initial assessment meeting for the minerals governance framework aligned to how Nigeria is mainstreaming the AMV into its national development plans et al., then NESG will be there, government will be there, other stakeholders will be there. And as such, our support is not necessarily just targeted at government. In this case, it will actually be working with everyone who actually has the same end goal in line with what we want to achieve. So NESG can actually depend on AMDC in the same way that the government depends on the AMDC. I don't know if that is a worthy response, but I can go deeper if need be.
We should follow that up. NESG should follow that up and continue the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, most definitely, sir. So let me go to the Q&A. Okay, so our panelists, Ms. Ade's comments were to Dr. Oji, why are the NATO reports behind? How do you accelerate the process of, or how do you catch up? And then disaggregating the reports would be important. And she's also talks about how the AMV prioritizes linkages and industrialization, and how we'll have to first use the country mining vision, which is an AMV instrument to that process of mainstreaming the AMV. Okay, so Dr. Oji, just note that point, please, about why the report is behind and when you hope to update it, though I think you've already mentioned that. So let me go quickly to the Q&A. Mr. Patrick Odiegu, who has a barite and manganese mining company in Benue in Nigeria, is also a member of our thematic group. His question is to the AMDC about how you can support active mining companies struggling with funding, markets, and linkages. Are there any special units that can quickly reach out to that desired support? I could answer that question. That's where but I'll give it back to Mihululi to answer. I don't think they support individual companies directly, but that's why in the mainstreaming the AMV, they have several instruments where we'll be building a mining financing ecosystem so that companies like yours can access funding. So I'll give it to Hulili now to please respond to that question.
This is one of those times whereby the teacher will literally say the student has done so well. I think I was actually learning as you were speaking. That actually is the response. As AMDC, we are a policy organ of the AU. Remember, that's why we became a specialized agency of the AU. Policy is more or less what we focus on. Individual support to companies, we will always find a way to ensure that other ecosystems that can support the companies are there. But for us to actually say there is a way to direct you, it then goes against our, how can I put it, our position of neutrality. So as a policy organ, unfortunately, we can't support you directly, but we always find a way of ensuring that, especially when it comes to stakeholder consultations, the private sector exists and finds out exactly how they can actually assist themselves based on what the policy suggestions or policy implications of some of our work will be pointing towards.
Thank you. Let me see. Someone asked if the recording will be shared to participants. NESG, if you can please respond to that comment in the chat box. Will you share the recording to participants? There's a question here about how does one invest in the mining sector? You can approach the Miners Association for that, or should I leave? Okay, we can, if there's enough time, I'll open it for him to respond to that question. Okada has been, then there are comments about if, okay, says the Mr. Ado says the main issue is the government keeps appointing inexperienced people. Sorry, I'll skip that part. And he talks about policy somersaults and asked whether the upward review of the royalties and the rates, how it could lead to legitimate indigenous mining companies losing their hard-earned money. Okay, sorry, it's a question. President Mr. Dele, the question is, will the upward review of the royalties and the rates lead to legitimate indigenous companies losing their hard-earned money?
Please come again.
Said, will the upward review of the royalties and rates likely lead to legitimate indigenous companies losing their hard-earned money? Legitimate indigenous mining companies losing their hard-earned money.
We are aware that recently the ministry has calls to revoke over 2,000 licenses, and I think it's due to non-payment of dues and rates as at when due. So if it continues, if this present rate subsists, and we have indigenous miners who cannot afford to service their licenses or pay royalty rates, that tendency there is a high tendency that such an indigenous miner might lose their investment.
So I don't know, is it possible that mining companies, indigenous companies too, can start to form a cooperative rather than try to tackle some of these issues? Because I know, the way I put it is that being a miner in Nigeria is expensive. If you want to do the right thing, if you want to comply with the law and the regulations, it's expensive. So are you in your association also thinking of how do you encourage that cooperative model amongst miners? I'm not talking about ASM model, but companies with exploration licenses and even some mining titles forming themselves into cooperatives.
So many things go with the issue of cooperative, and I think as it's presently structured, it is just for the artisanal miners. Corporate bodies coming to form cooperatives, and I don't think that one is I don't think so far. I mean, I don't think there's any conversation towards that. Presently, no.
Okay, all right. Can talk offline on that. So, Mr.
And I raised my hand. I just want to make a very brief comment. And I was trying to tap it on the comment, the chat box, but let me just say it in a few seconds. I just want to say that in view of the consensus, that there's need for a robust policy to make sure that every stakeholder is brought on board in mining regulations and mining participation. I think there will be need for a plea to be made to the National Assembly to pause the current process of review of the Mining Act. Otherwise, what may be the outcome if there's not any robust policy to direct that kind of review? The outcome of that review may worse off the sector. So I think there's a need. We can't force them, at least we can plead the National Assembly to please pause a bit so that there will be a policy framework to be able to make whatever review as effective as possible. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. Thankfully, again, the country mining vision of the AMV provides a guideline of how this, the stakeholders that should come together to develop a new mining policy, and it's very broad. It cuts across different sectors, different MDAs from different sectors, and it cuts across, the federal and the subnational governments, associations like yours, universities, and so on. So as he said earlier, I'm a good student. So let me just go quickly to the other comments, questions.
Yeah,
and we have very little time left.
Can I just please make a quick clarification, Amanda, please? I lost out, my system went out. Please, quickly. I just want to thank the comments on the area I made, the clarification that we need a standing company. Please, I left it open. I say I don't have specific idea how it could be structured. For Native, we prefer a private sector company that will stand firm in the sector. And we gave example of the Nigerian NLNG. It's a very well-run organization. That template can work in the solid mineral sector. There's two. There was also a comment on why 90 reports are late, where we are publishing two reports, 2022 and 2023 together, on the 24th of this month, September, bringing our reports to date. We don't normally allow it to be late, but there were institutional challenges along the way, the election, new government, but we have fixed all that. So thank you very much. My sister Amina Sejuade brought up that very important observation. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Jumoke, I will direct this question to you. That the discussions here is about the need for a mining vision. However, he's aware of mining policy, which is what we've been discussing here, but that he's aware that there is a mining roadmap. So is it that the mining roadmap is obsolete, or is it that it does not align with our mining reality? So if you can please explain why the policy is different from a roadmap and so on. Jumoke?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you very much, Amanda.
Just a brief comment, please.
Okay. So the roadmap, it's pretty much an implementation plan towards achieving an objective. So the mining policy, which incorporates what the objective of government is and how that will be achieved. The roadmap then goes granular into setting the specific objectives, timelines, short-term plans, long-term plans, medium-term plans, into achieving all of those components that go into the policy. So it's important, like everyone has mentioned on this call, that we first start with the policy. But I do note Prince Adetokunbo's comment about the fact that the country vision is first important to align And then we now have a policy that is based on the country vision. And then from that, we go on to the implementation plan, which will include establishment of enactment of new laws, regulations, establishing institutional frameworks if they do not exist already, and the likes. So I hope that addresses the question.
Yes,
briefly, I think Nigerian factor happened to the roadmap. Since after the exit of Dr. Fayemi, what we learned was that because there's an implementation team on ground that was supposed to monitor the timelines and milestones and review of that mining roadmap. But I think immediately after the exit of Dr. Fayemi from the ministry, that team stopped. I mean, funding to that team stopped. I think that's what happened. And it's like I said, Nigerian situation happened to it. You know, there are a lot of policies like that we don't implement. That is why we are making this front and back movement in not only in Nigeria but even in other. I mean, not only in mining but in other sectors as well.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. That's a very important.
Amanda, I'm also sorry, Amanda. Is there nobody from the Ministry of Solid Minerals in this team? Nobody from MCO or MID?
We invited them, but
because I don't want us to be seen to be speaking to ourselves. I'm sure they would have provided some updates. Please, thank you.
Yeah, we invited them, but they're not here, so we still had to hold this event.
Madam Amanda.
Said we invited them, sir, but they're not here. So we still had to go ahead with the event.
I wanted to suggest that is why there's need for the ownership.
Exactly.
Ownership, the bottom line, ownership.
Yes.
You know, money is business, and government's role is just regulatory and collect its tax and create an enabling environment. The bulk of work is done by the private sector. That's just the truth. And you will see, ultimately, that's what's going to happen because we believe and we trust that we will get it right in this country. We believe that, absolutely.
Which is why we strongly recommend that NESG should take up the initiative and proceed.
Ownership.
At some stage, when we get to a point where a concrete policy proposal is made, we can then work with the government at every level to ensure that the policy is indeed put in place and that it is ownership is shared. I think it will happen, but we have to take the initiative and move forward.
Okay, sir. So I would like to, Saz and Ms. Sijwadi, I'd like to close the panel session. I'd like to thank all of you for the comments, the insights you shared. I'd like to thank those who asked questions. Unfortunately, we cannot questions. I just picked on those that it was quite clear what's been said. We've taken on the feedback and the recommendations from the panelists and from some of the stakeholders who's attendees, participants who sent in comments. As you know, what we do here at the NESG is advocacy. So even before this and so on, and we'll continue this advocacy drive after the pre-summit. Jumoke will close and say what the next steps are. But I'd like to encourage all stakeholders. When the president of Miners Association said that in the roadmap there were statements there about further work that needed to be done, but these were not implemented. So now it's important that stakeholders work together, as almost like a coalition. If there's nobody making those demands for policy change, most likely nothing will change. So when stakeholders work together, I think that we can begin to see drive the change that we need in the industry. And here at the NESG, what we drive is evidence-based advocacy. So On our part, our advocacy is evidence-based, and we're also encouraging the government that any policy action that they take is also evidence-based. For instance, in increasing that the rates and the royalties, there needed to be some evidence-based decision-making and consultative process back in that process. So I'll close here and just like to thank you, the panelists once again, and the participants for your insights. Jumoke?
Thank you very much, Amanda. Thank you very much to our panelists and speakers. We've had a very engaging session. The discussions were very rich. The ideas shared were very, very instructive. So as we come to the end of this event, I'd like to extend my deepest gratitude to every one of you for your active participation and contribution, even from the audience and the questions that you sent in. So this session has provided us with a framework for our deliberations, and the conversations we've had are instrumental in shaping the conversations that we'll have going forward. And the thematic group remains committed to enhancing the policy and business environment for the mining sector. So with this, again, I would like to invite as many people on this call that are interested in volunteering with the thematic group, interested in putting their voices to their knowledge, skill, and expertise to the advocacy efforts that we're doing, to please volunteer. A link will be dropped in the chat room, or has been dropped already, so you can click on that link and follow the prompt, and then somebody will be in touch with you. So we note the comments made by Prince about the NESG driving the policy development for the mining sector, and steps are being taken in this regard, and an implementation plan to drive this this policy development will be presented at NEST 30. And we'll also push for the establishment of a mining industry working group to collectively drive these reforms. So thank you once again. We look forward to engaging further with you, and we look forward to NEST 30 as we continue these conversations and put all hands on deck to drive the industry forward. Thank you very much. Have a good evening, and God bless.
Bye-bye. Thank you all.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you, everyone. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Goodbye,
To me,
everyone.
thank you, Amanda. Thank you,
Thank
everybody.
you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Dr. G, well done.
Sorry, please, can you what?
Bye-bye.
Can you put on your video so we can have a quick photo?
Hello?
Also? Oh, it's late. It's okay. It's all right.
Yeah.
Thank you. Bye.
Do we put it on?
Okay, yes, please. For those who are still here.
For those that are still here. Okay. Who's taking
Mine is on.
Smile.
Oh dear.
Okay.
Yes.
Take you.
Thank
Okay.
you.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks.
Amanda, okay?
Yes, sir.
All right. Bye-bye.
All right.